If you are one of those narcissistic alternative into mysticism person that believes they are superior because they just don't have a job, use too many drugs, and apparently talk to spirits, or you are just a nerd who loves MBTI, you probably heard about the word individuation. In Jungian psychology, this is the process of becoming whole, let's say. It's integrating who you already are in potential, your past, your present, your future, the good and the bad traits within yourself, from all of the things you've personally repressed, from the things that are archetypical in all of humanity, and knowing that you can become that thing as well. In theory, many, if not almost every successful person, to some degree, had achieved this individuation. But this isn't something eternal that a person holds forever like a plateau. It is more similar to the transcendence in Buddhism or in Nietzsche's Übermensch. It is an ideal of sorts that you must seek to achieve throughout your whole life. For Jung, this could happen in many ways. The most common is in the integration of the opposites. Just like Taoism, there is yin and there is yang. Once they are together, they become whole, they complete each other. Here, Jung calls this duality enantiodromia, being inspired by the Greek philosopher Heraclitus that uses this term to denote the very same duality that seems to hold everything in life. But there is a catch. Integration doesn't mean compensation. For example, it happens when a man becomes aware of his more feminine traits, the animals meeting the anima, but only if he has already been aware of his masculine traits before. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a completion, an individuation, but rather just repression and compensation. But duality is integrating both to the same degree. In the MBTI/16 personality terms, this means not only living and accepting your dominant function, but learning to use your opposite trait as well, the famous shadow or inferior function. Now, let's see how this happens in each of MBTIs here. ISTP and INTP both use the TI, the introverted thinking, which is about having an internal logic, a personal framework of thought that initially and in principle can only make sense to the TI dominant. Because of this, both of these types can be seen as too detached from everyone else, almost like if they didn't need anyone else because they believe their opinions are so much better and so much superior. But the problem is this: a truth that is a truth for only one person isn't a truth at all. It is a delusion. For this, the TI don'ts need to integrate their FE, the extroverted feeling, a function that adds human awareness, social connections, and emotionality. While TI can be too trapped in only analyzing, the FE is what externalizes and gives motion to these thoughts. Without this function, the ISTP becomes, in a sense, useless, with too much knowledge in their heads, but too little action in their own hands. ESTJs and ENTJs both use TE or extroverted thinking. While TI DOMs seek to organize their thoughts, the TE DOMs seek to organize external reality by setting goals, commanding people, systems, and producing visual results. TE DOM believes the world is something to be structured, optimized, and even conquered. But when push comes to shove, focusing too much on objectives can make them feel lost in what is truly meaningful to them, their personal values and emotions. With this, they become tyrants, not only for others, but mostly for them, living a life of imprisonment in which they sentence themselves with, always achieving something but never having real fulfillment by it. It might be bright in the golden days, but it never leads to a fulfilling end in their lives. Divorces, diseases, they are all common for them. For this, the integration of FI, or introverted feeling, is to realize that not everything in life needs to be a marathon. It is possible to be successful in your own personal metrics. What do you like? What do you enjoy? Do not care about what others are seeing or valuing. It is asking first, what do you value for yourself? ISFPs and INFPs Both of these types lead with FI, introverted feeling, which builds a deep internal value system under famous emotional authenticity. While TI dumps know what is logically right, the FI dumps know what it feels right and base all of their actions upon this personal and sometimes illogical feeling. But like Nietzsche himself said, sometimes it is necessary to go beyond good and evil. Because if FI becomes too obsessed with what it itself enjoys, it will easily forget what is necessary and practical in life. They may become depressed because if the meaning of your life is getting what is good and avoiding what is bad, what happens when these bad things come? And they will come. It is what makes these types also be seen sometimes as depressive and even dependent. Unless they integrate the already spoken TE, the extroverted thinking. These types need to force themselves not only to do what they enjoy, but most of the time to also do what is necessary, what is useful, just like everybody else, not just themselves. They need to learn to work for what they want, to create abilities or gather information that can be useful to others. It is to accept that society also exists, that other people's opinions and goals can be different from theirs and be just as valid as well. And that the FI dons can be a part in all of this system, and that doing all of this can also be very fulfilling. In other words, you don't always need motivation. Sometimes all you need is to do it, and to keep doing it until it is over. ESFJs and ENFJs both lead with FE, extroverted feeling. While FI is about morality and personal values, FE is about ethics and collective values. That is what makes them be seen as empathetic and wanting to create harmony to attend everyone's needs. But with this, they might forget their own desires, their own necessities, their very own being. And this begs the question. How can you help someone if you aren't properly taking care of yourself? That's why FE dons must integrate TI, the introverted thinking. They need to stop feeling and acting and doing and start to just think for a long time. They need to clarify their goals, their motives, their reasons. Is literally to ask, why am I doing this? What do I want to achieve with it? And sometimes even follow their own heads instead of their hearts. Again, how can you take care of someone if you cannot even take care of yourself? Be more egotistical, please. ISTJs and ISFJs both rely on SI, introverted sensing, which is about storing experiences, traditions, and internal sensations, let's say. SI preserves what works, what is stable, and what is routinary. They live on habits, and when something happens that contradicts their previously imposed routine, then they flip. In a sense, memory without imagination becomes just stagnation. That's why these types must integrate an E, the extroverted intuition, a function about accepting novelty, accepting possibility, and accepting that things can and will change. Not everything needs to be rigid, because if it was, when the least pressure achieves them, they do not bend. They break altogether and make everything fall. Learn to accept meaningless change. ESFPs and ESTPs. These types use dominant SE, extroverted sensing. They want in a sense to feel it all, to respond fast, move fast, leave everything. But the problem of walking too much is going anywhere. For this, the SE DOMs must integrate an I, introverted intuition. An I gives purpose, meaning, trajectory, and long-term vision. Without an I, the SE DOMs are just merely reacting to objects. They do not think, they do not reflect, and do not go anywhere specific. They might gain short-term success and power, but just like Shakespeare said, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of the infinite space. But completing the sentence with Eminem, Why be a king for a finite moment when you can be forever a god? Learn to think in the long run. ENFP and ENTPs. Both of them lead with an E, extrovert and intuition. They are constantly generating ideas, seeing potential futures, living in expectations. But if they do not become grounded in something, they become too idealistic, too much like caterpillars that want someday to become butterflies, but never eating all of the leaves that will turn them into that someday. In other words, any DOMs must integrate SI, the introverted sensing. Otherwise, they just live in fiction. SI brings consistency, routine, and continuity. Without SI, EX and Ps become too scattered, always imagining what can happen, but never starting the necessary for it to truly last. In Jung's own words, if only he could stay put, he would reap the fruits of his labors. But always he must be running after a new possibility, quitting his newly planted fields while others gather in the harvest. In the end, he goes away empty. In other words, learn to be consistent, create schedules, routines, and stick to them for good. INFJs and INTJs both use an I, introverted intuition, focusing on the deeper patterns, the long-term visions, the hidden meanings behind the hidden meanings. They live in abstraction, in their future trajectories, and the symbolic understanding of the world. But using an I too far away and along disconnects them from the physical reality. And with this, with the truth they want to unravel so much, vision without embodiment becomes just schizophrenia. These connections might make sense in their heads, but if it doesn't take a grasp of the physical, it will be just like Plato's cavern, a shadow of what reality really looks like. That's why NI-DOMs must integrate SE, the extroverted sensing. This function anchors them in the present moment, in the short-term happenings that aggregate to their theories. You cannot have a full grasp of what real is without realizing first what there is in reality. It just doesn't work. In a sense, individuation is this. Is realizing your strengths, your powers, your dominant functions, and realizing also your weaknesses, your detriments, your shadow and inferior functions, then integrating one and the other. So what about you? What is your type? What are your dominant traits, your shadow, and what are you doing right now to leverage one with the other? Tell me in the comments. My name is Julius Caesar. If you are looking for a consultation on your Jungian type, check the link in the description. Let's book a session, and I see you in the next time. Bye-bye.